All right, next up, nitrogen cycle. This one's one of my favorites. The nitrogen cycle is a personal favorite of mine because this is what I used to study. I used to do research on nitrogen fixing diatoms, so I'm a big fan of our nitrogen cycle. In our nitrogen cycle, we have a lot of bacteria in action. This is one that bacteria play a crucial role in the cycling of nitrogen on Earth. Nitrogen fixation is one of the main processes. We'll go into these processes a little bit more, but that's when nitrogen gas is converted into a different form. So nitrogen fixation takes that N2 gas and changes it. It can either happen through lightning or through industrial processes that we have developed. In that case, it's going to change it into nitrate. And it can also happen through bacteria and biotic processes. Bacteria and cyanobacteria, they can take that nitrogen gas and make it into ammonia by combining it with hydrogen, ammonia or ammonium. Nitrification happens when that ammonia or ammonium is changed into nitrate ions. That's when it can start being used by our plants, by our producers. And then the opposite happens with denitrification, where those nitrate ions are converted to nitrous oxide and then eventually into that nitrogen gas. Human impacts, again, we have impacts on the nitrogen cycle. We have impacts on everything. We are removing nitrogen gas from the atmosphere faster than it can be replaced. And we're doing that because we want it for our industrial fertilizers primarily. That's why we would be removing our nitrogen from the atmosphere. And we do have a lot of nitrogen on Earth, and we have a very large amount of nitrogen in our atmosphere, but we can still deplete it faster than we can replenish it with our natural cycling. So in more detail with those different processes, I'm adding a couple of them here too. So we have nitrogen fixation. That's the first step, is taking that atmospheric nitrogen, that N2 from the gaseous form, and converting it. So nitrogen fixation can either be biotic or abiotic. It can happen from biotic processes where those bacteria and cyanobacteria are converting the N2 to ammonia. On the other hand, nitrogen fixation also happens abiotically. So abiotically, with our lightning, it converts it straight to nitrate. It skips these middle steps and goes straight to our nitrate. But that is still nitrogen fixation because it's converting that nitrogen gas. Once we have our ammonium or our nitrate, some sort of biologically usable form of nitrogen, then it can be assimilated. So consumers are going to assimilate it by eating the producers. Producers are going to assimilate it by taking it into their bodies, into their tissues from the bacteria that can live in their root nodules. Those are nitrogen-fixing bacteria living on in those rhizomes there. These are our cyanobacteria. Those are the ones who are fixing our nitrogen in the ocean. And then again, we have some more root nodules over here that are helping to fix our nitrogen. So after it's been assimilated, after we've lived a nice long life, then we die. And so decomposers can take all of that biological nitrogen that's encapsulated in all of your tissues and break it down in ammonification. Ammonification is when those are broken down and turned back into ammonium. All right, that ammonium, again, can be nitrified. So we can take this and nitrify it. We can turn it back into nitrite and then nitrate, and then we can use it again. We can assimilate it. So this is constantly going back and forth in a flow here. We're constantly fixing nitrogen, assimilating it, dying, ammonifying, and nitrifying. So all of these processes are happening constantly in a cycle. They're going back and forth all the time. Nitrification, all of these processes here happen in oxygen-rich environments. So all of these happen in the presence of oxygen, whereas denitrification is happening in anaerobic conditions, oxygen-poor conditions. So that could be in soils that are really compacted, that don't have any oxygen underneath it. It could be in stagnant water. So in these oxygen-poor environments, denitrification is happening. That nitrate, that biologically usable form, is being converted into nitrous oxide. That nitrous oxide eventually turns into nitrogen gas, and that's how it gets back up into our atmosphere, is denitrification. So this is the step that returns it to the atmosphere. All of these are constantly going back and forth, keeping that nitrogen usable for living things. All right, so if we were to put this in a diagram, we have our nice cycle here. We start with our nitrogen gas in our atmosphere. It gets fixed either through industrial and abiotic factors like lightning. Then it's turning into that nitrate directly. Remember, we skip all of those steps, go straight to nitrate when we do our abiotic processes here. Or the nitrogen fixation can happen biotically, where our bacteria in the roots and the cyanobacteria, they take it and make it into ammonia, which is then turned into ammonium ions. And then it can go through nitrification. And those nitrifying bacteria can turn that ammonium or that ammonia into our nitrite, which turns into nitrate. Once it is that nitrate, that's when it can get assimilated. So the nitrates are assimilated by our producers into their body processes, and then the producers are eaten and assimilated into our consumers, or they die and we decompose. So if our producers are not consumed, or once they are consumed, once our consumers die, all of these things die eventually and decompose. So those decomposers take our nitrogen that was locked up in our plants and animals. They go through ammonification. They change it back into that ammonium ion. Some producers can also use ammonium ions for their processes, so that could be directly assimilated as well without being skipped over into the nitrate and nitrite. Last thing on here is our denitrification. So all of these nitrates in our oxygen poor environments can be denitrified, turned into our nitrous oxide, which then converts into nitrogen gas and returns back to our atmosphere. So we are changing the nitrogen cycle with the industrial fertilizer production primarily. We are taking a lot of nitrogen out of the atmosphere to make our industrial fertilizers so that we can have all of our agriculture, all of our plants growing that we want, all of our cows fed with all of our corn. So we are taking a lot of nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere. All right, that's our nitrogen cycle. It seems complicated, but I promise it makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't.